Today in the garden tour, I'm going to show you what the garden looks like this week, as well as getting into what I'm seeding. And if you stick around to the end, I've got a little hack for cleaning up dead stalks from last year's perennials. So you can see the leeks and onions are doing pretty well. I'm slowly filling in the holes that I put the leeks into. This just helps to blanch the stem, but you don't want to bury the growing tip. So I just cover them slowly over time. So I've got some potatoes that I've chitted out. I made a video about that earlier. You can see the results. This is why we do that. I'm going to be planting them in this bed. And I prepared this bed last week, and I actually watered it last night as well to make sure it was nice and moist. That just helps keep the dust out of your face, and it's a lot easier to water in stages, slowly soaking it through rather than trying to soak it after you've added the seed. It also makes the lines nice and easy to see. So I just go through and I mark off my roughly 1 foot by 1 foot squares. I'm not super particular, but it just gives me a bit of a guideline. And then I'm going to go ahead and make sure I've got enough seed for everything. Got two varieties this year. I have a purple one that I have been gifted by family. I don't know the specific variety name, but I do know that they're just really good potatoes. I'm just going to go ahead and lay them all out so I can see whether I have enough, because counting is lame. And there's a couple more spots off screen, so you might not see them, but there's 3 spots off screen that you can't quite see, so I am 4 potato seeds short. I'm just going to take some of the biggest potatoes and cut them, and I'm just making sure that they have a really good chit on each section that I've cut off. At least 1, preferably 2. You can do this in advance and let that open section heal. Generally I don't bother, but sometimes if I'm having issues with wireworms, then I will actually go ahead and dip that freshly cut edge in wood ash, just to prevent the worms from smelling the fresh potatoes and getting at them before they can actually make plants. So as you can see, I'm not going super deep here, but I am going deep enough to cover the sprouts on the potatoes. Now this is important because with determinate potatoes, and most of the early varieties are determinates, where they first erupt, where they first get sunlight, is where they're going to set their potato tubers at, right? So you want to make sure that that is well and truly buried. So with the chitting out, they have erupted at the surface of the potato. What that means is now when I bury them and completely bury that sprout, that means that it's going to set the potatoes underneath the soil. If I were to set the sprouts or the potatoes at the level of the soil, then they're going to want to put the potatoes at that level as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bury them so that the sprouts are completely underground, even if it's only just a little bit. Even if I'm just sort of piling a little bit of dirt up to get the top of the sprouts under dirt, that's fine. Because this is a raised bed, I don't want to dig too deep. It's just a waste of time, and it's harder to dig up the potatoes if they're dug too deeply. So I just put them in fairly shallowly. And then once they erupt a second time, I know that that second eruption out of the soil, they're not going to put their potatoes at that level. So what I'll do at that point is I will go ahead and cover the entire bed with grass clippings is my preference. You can use like shredded leaves, or if you can get a source of really clean hay, you can shred the hay and use that. I prefer the grass because it makes a nice uniform sort of compact coating, so it keeps the weeds down. But that also, what also it does is that it prevents any of those potatoes that grow just under the surface of the soil that might sort of poke out of the surface as they're swelling. It just keeps the sunlight off of them so they don't turn green. You don't want your green potatoes. They're not good for you. So that's kind of why I do it this way. In the ground, you can also do it this way. You just want to make sure that you have them deep enough and that you have a thick enough layer of mulch. If you do not want to use mulch at all, then you're going to want to go with the row method. Basically, you're just going to want to plant them the same way, but you want enough space between the rows that you can put extra dirt from between the rows over the freshly sprouted potatoes to keep them from going green. I'm also seeding this week beets as well as peas, which will come a little bit later. And you can see I'm just using a dibber here. This is just a little tool I've made myself. I've seen them for sale other places. And I'm just using it to poke holes. Now with the beets, they're not super deep holes, maybe 1/2 inch, and I don't expect the soil to fill them completely. So yeah, I'm just sort of spacing them out how I think these particular beets will do well. And then I will put the seeds in. Again, I watered this last night. Making the little holes with the dibber is a lot easier when your soil is damp rather than dry. When it's dry, it just wants to fill back in like dry sand at the beach. So I'm just going to go ahead and put a seed in each hole here. You can, of course, use the same method I used with the carrots, where you scrape back a layer of soil, spread out your seeds, and then sprinkle the soil back over. I just like this method because of the precision, and it saves me a little bit of energy moving all the dirt back and forth. Also works well in tight spaces if you don't have somewhere to move the dirt to. It's also a good time to make sure that you're definitely hardening off your warm season crops. I've been hardening stuff off for the last week at least, and what I've been doing to save myself a little bit of time and energy is I've actually split my plants into 2 groups. One group is downstairs and one group is upstairs, and I'll just alternate which plants go out which day. So today the upstairs ones will go outside, and then I'll bring them in at night. And then tomorrow the downstairs ones will go outside, and then I'll bring them in at night. And that way I don't have to move everything every day, but it does take longer to harden them off. I also pulled my artichokes out from the mini fridge and just put them in the patio to harden off. They can handle a little bit of frost, so I won't be taking them in for night unless it's looking like a real cold night. But I want to harden them off a little bit, at least to the sun, because they've just been in the fridge in the dark for 2 weeks. And then I'm going to plant them out and get them growing. I'm just going to go ahead here and seed my peas. I've got 2 varieties of sweet peas and a variety of snow peas. Dalve is going on this particular fence. They're not super tall, but they vine really well, and they tend to give a second crop if the season is nice and warm and dry. And the other variety I've got is called Green Arrow, which is a classic variety, very productive, nice and tall and upright plants. Some people don't choose to put their peas on supports, but I find if you put them on a fence, it is a lot easier to pick. You don't have to bend down so far. I can usually pick all of my peas standing up, so I can just walk along and collect them. And I find that a lot easier on my body than bending over or getting near the ground. So I do like having the peas in the raised beds, again, because between that and the fences, they're right at waist height, so and higher, so I don't have to bend over to reach them. In the snow pea variety, I've got, I think, it's Golden Sweet or something like that. Haven't grown them before, looking forward to it though. They're a yellow pod. Now, with certain things like beans, green beans and snow peas, you want to harvest them in a fairly narrow window so they're nice and tender and young. And so it is handy then to have those be a different color than the plant. So whenever I can, I'll get yellow or purple beans. And in this case, I've got yellow snow peas, so I'll see the pods right away and they won't get too big before I can actually see them well enough to harvest them. That just means that at a glance I can tell whether or not there's something to harvest and I don't miss a whole bunch of produce. With the peas, it's a little bit more difficult. You generally can't find multicolored pea pods. There are some varieties of purple I've seen. I do like the Dalve because the plant itself is very blue, sort of a velvety blue-green color, and so the green pods stand out better. With the green arrow, the difference is not as strong, but because they hold their peas out so much, it's usually fairly easy to see them. And you've got a little bit of a bigger window to harvest peas in my experience. Once they start going, I just go out every other day anyway to harvest whether or not I see them, and so that is a little bit less particular. With the beans as well, I'm not seeding them yet because they like warmer soil. But I do like using pole beans as opposed to bush beans because, again, you don't have to bend over to pick them. You can just walk along and pick them off as they're growing, which I find a lot easier. I do have some bush beans just because they're good varieties and they're good producers, and I also have some bush beans that are a dry bean variety. The Jacob's cattle that I've showed you last year, they do really well. And because they're a bush bean, they don't really need a whole lot of attention or anything. Because they're a dry bean, I only have to harvest them in the fall anyway once they're totally dry. So it's just one big harvest. I'm not worried about the timing and checking them all the time. So that's all right. But I do like upright plants more. It just gives structure to the garden as well as being easier to pick. So I generally go for vining pole bean types or climbing types rather than bush types for that reason. They also tend to take up a little bit less space because you can, a little bit less ground space I should say, because of course they grow up, they don't spread out horizontally. So useful in small spaces. And I like to take the opportunity to make my structures beautiful and attractive. I've got a video coming on plant structures, and we'll go over all the kinds of structures I use and have used. And yeah, so the peas, beets, the lettuce got put in last week. I'm not sure if you guys missed that video or not, but it's out there. The cabbage and onions have been in the garden for a while now. The cabbages are all undercover, and they're going to stay undercover for the season to keep the bugs off of them. Right now, I'm not worried about the cabbage moth at all, but I don't want the cabbage root maggot to lay eggs in the soil around the cabbages, so I'm going to leave them covered if I can. Always make sure you water your seeds. With my small seeds like lettuce and carrots and beets, because they're small, especially the lettuce and the carrots, they're very small seed, they're fairly shallowly sown. I try to water them, surface water them pretty much every day because this soil is so easily dry, at least until they sprout. Once they sprout, they've got roots a little bit deeper down, and I don't need to water all the time. I just want to keep the soil at the surface where the seeds are damp enough that they can germinate properly. With the deeper seeds like peas, I try to give them one good soak after they're sown, and then if it's really dry, I'll do it again. But that's about it. Other things that happened in the garden this week, we mowed the wildflower patch. I've been noticing the song sparrows hanging out in there, and I wanted to mow it before they started nesting. I also put my little birdhouse on my stump. Hopefully they will make themselves feel at home once again. And here's that hack I wanted to show you. So this is a dianthus that I've been growing for a number of years, and it can be a bit difficult to clean up all of the dead material. I've also got a row of tarragon I'll show you in a bit, and snipping them all off by hand is a real pain. So I discovered this method with a rake. You basically just push into the plant, push against the plant so the stalks are laying down one way. You push your rake over a little bit sideways to capture them, and then you pull forward, and that just snaps off all the dead material without actually harming any of the greens. You can see, do it again here. It's a little bit faster. I'll slow it down in a second. This is tarragon. This is a Russian tarragon. It's extremely hardy, and you can eat the small spears as they come up out of the ground, a bit like asparagus, although they are definitely a little bit more herby in flavor, so I like mixing them with green beans or other greens. So just push in, pull sideways, and then pull forward. And this made taking down all of that stuff a real pleasure instead of being down on the ground and snipping them off one at a time. So, hope that trick works for you too. And last little look at the pumpkin patch. I want to do a couple videos on my sort of plans for the pumpkin patch this year, what I'm doing, why I'm doing it. As you can see, we have tilled between the rows, and I've got a whole bunch of wood mulch ready to make paths. We're going to discuss all of that in a future video. Saskatoon's just about ready to bloom. And I put up the rest of my T-posts for all my raspberries. I've got 3 raspberries right now, but I'm getting some more this spring. I wanted to put up some supports for them. So I figured I'd just show you guys what else is growing in the garden this week. These are all perennials. And I hope you had a lovely time. We'll see ya.